All right, the room is filling. We have 2 p.m. sharp. I would say let's start. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the presentation of the 16th edition of the Climate Change Performance Index, hashtag CCPI. My name is Audrey Mathieu. I am a senior advisor for EU climate policy at Germanwatch, and I have the pleasure to moderate today the presentation of the CCPI. The CCPI is published every year since 2005. It tracks countries' efforts to fight climate change. It is an independent monitoring tool which aims to enhance transparency in international climate politics and which enables comparison of climate protection efforts and progress made by individual countries or parties. Next slide, please. I would like to warmly welcome our speakers today, my colleague Jan Burg from Germanwatch and Professor Niklas Höhne from New Climate Institute, both co-author of the CCPI. Hi. Stefan Singer from Can Climate Action Network, co-publisher of the CCPI. Hi, Stefan. And Hajar Hamlishi, also from Climate Action Network. Welcome also to all the colleagues around the world who helped us a lot with the CCPI and did great work. I know a lot of them are joining today or watching our live stream. And I'm sorry, I won't spare you with some very brief technical directions. First, the presentations will be recorded, but not the following Q&A sessions. And second, after the presentations, please do use the Zoom function Q&A for your questions or raise your hand and we will pass you the mic. Well, we are in a busy week for climate protection as we stand ahead of a crucial European Council on 10 and 11 December, at which the EU head of states shall discuss and hopefully agree on the level of the new emission reductions target for 2030. Allow me a few words on this, as it has been a big subject for our CCPI. The EU stands at a crossroads. The European Parliament agreed on a target of 60% emission cuts, excluding carbon removals. This is well beyond the European Commission's target proposal of at least 55%. And the so far known draft proposal of the Council to set the domestic target to at least 55% would be a huge step, but does not go far enough, especially if we are talking about a net target, which would include carbon removals. So the decision of this week of this December Council will set the bar for the EU's overall climate ambition for the coming decade, and it shall be a very important signal for the international community. Indeed, after a day after EU leaders decide on the level of their climate ambition, the UN is hosting an event for the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, where the EU is expected to take a lead and together with other major emitters announce increased ambition and create the necessary international dynamic for revised global ambition ahead of COP26 next year. UK has already announced an NDC of at least 68% emission reduction by 2030. Now it's European Council's turn. I'll stop here and let's get to the heart of this online launch of the Climate Change Performance Index. Niklas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, thanks for joining in today. What is the Climate Change Performance Index? Well, it is an index looking at the climate change performance and what countries are doing to fight against climate change. We cover 57 countries and the EU, and with that we cover almost 90% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's really a broad coverage. The idea is to make these 57 countries plus comparable across each other. And how do we do it? On the next slide, we see that we have 4 main categories that we look into. We look at energy use and renewable energy, which together then make up 40% of our rating. We also look at the greenhouse gas emissions, so the trends and future targets of greenhouse gas emissions. And the unique element of this index is a survey amongst 400 experts or in all of these 57 countries, which basically give us information on how good the climate policies are. If you, on the next slide, you see that it's in these 4 categories, we have 14 indicators. So the climate policy is divided by international and domestic climate policy. And for the other categories, we always look at what happened in the past. So how good was the trajectory in the past? Where are we today? And what are the targets that the countries have set themselves? Where do they want to go into the future? And actually, on the next slide, you see that in a bit more detail. For greenhouse gas emissions, the one thing that's very important, especially this week, are the targets for what countries are planning to do in the next 10 years until 2030. And unfortunately, we know that almost all countries have insufficient targets put forward. They are not in line with what is necessary to be on a well below 2-degree pathway or in the direction of 1.5 as the Paris Agreement requires it. So in this index, we check whether the target is in line with what's needed for the Paris Agreement. And we actually see that it is not sufficient. We have seen some updates from Chile and Norway, for example. UK has just updated their short-term target, but that was so short time ago that it's not reflected here yet. The other important development that we have seen in the last months are long-term targets. So many countries have said that they want to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to 0 by the middle of the century. EU, China, and possibly also the US would be in that category. But we are not measuring that here. We are measuring the short-term action until 2030, which is still the long-term targets that countries have made still need to propagate into short-term action. And we still are waiting for that. One last thing before I hand over is that 2020 has been a special year. With the COVID pandemic, things turned out to be different than a usual year, quite devastating pandemic. Greenhouse gas emissions are this year lower than they used to be in the previous years. But the index does not yet include that because our latest data is for 2018. But what the index does include, and that's a unique feature, we have asked our 400 experts questions about what governments are doing to recover from the pandemic and whether the recovery packages are supporting a low carbon transition or are in the way of a low carbon transition. And there our results are quite, give reasons for optimism, actually contrary to some other results from other studies. We find that more countries have reported measures that support low carbon trajectories than measures that are in the way. Still, you see in all countries contradicting measures. Some are supporting low carbon, some are not. So the jury is still out whether we'll really get the trajectory bended downwards with recovery, but it's not too late. There's many measures possible that support economic recovery and reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the same time. We are still in the middle of the pandemic. Many of the recovery packages are not fully designed. So there's still reasons for hope that countries can use this one moment to not only deal with the COVID-19 crisis, but also help to move in the right direction because of the climate crisis. With that, I hand over to Jan for the detailed results.
Thank you very much, Niklas. I would now like to briefly show you the results of this year's Climate Change Performance Index. And as you see here, as in previous year, the first three ranks remain empty. No country is doing good enough to prevent dangerous climate change out of our selection of the 58 countries with 90% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Even the countries in the front, like Sweden, UK, and Denmark this year, are leaders without a perfect record on climate protection. Sweden is here profiting very much from quite old policy measures. They started to have a quite high CO2 tax in the early 90s, which, for example, leads to the fact that there's now nearly have no emissions left in the building sector. The most of the oil and gas heaters are gone away. And so this is unique, I would say, for a country who really have to heat a lot, as you might know. However, national experts highlight also that Sweden needs to reach net zero emissions by 2030 if they want to be aligned with the Paris targets and want to be aligned with 1.5 degrees. And for that, they really need to tackle one problem in Sweden, which is energy efficiency, and a stringent target here is proposed from the experts. Few words on the UK. Audrey already mentioned the strong new climate target, which is not measured here, but they have done also other quite interesting things. They doubled the climate finance to support developing countries, and they plan to phase out new fossil-fueled cars by 2030, which is, compared to other countries, quite ambitious. In the next slide, we see the performance of the EU countries. The EU itself, we also measure it. The performance of the EU is one of the winners this year. It jumps 6 spots compared to last year on rank number 16. On the positive side, we definitely see the announcement of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, which is, from the experts' point of view, not in line with 1.5 degrees, but at least it was a good step in the right direction. And the increase of its 2030 emission reduction target up to minimum 55%, maybe more. Audrey explained to you this date of act in a moment. And of course, we have to see, and you see also the highly divided EU also in our table. You have 4 countries in the front, but also 5 countries rated very low here. We find, for example, Poland and Hungary among the very low performing countries, and both have in the moment increasing emissions and play and continuously regressive role in the EU negotiations by blocking climate policies and lowering the EU overall climate ambition. Moreover, the veto of the EU budget and recovery fund could be very problematic this week to reach an agreement about the increased climate target within the EU. So let's see whether these countries can move, and if they will move, and if they will agree, they will definitely climb up in the ranking, because this is a very important step for the international negotiations. On the G20 performance, on the next slide, the G20 has altogether 80% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and let me focus here on 2 major emitters here. India is ranked again under the top 10 of the index on number 10. In India, we still see relatively low emissions, but of course we see the emissions rising, coming from a relatively low level. Especially there are a lot of new coal power plants in the pipelines, and experts hope that not all of them will be built, and hope for this relatively good rated renewable energy policy framework for India. We have, especially for solar, great plans for a lot of extension here. And on the other side, we also see that the prices for solar and wind are decreasing that fast that even though if the government will support new coal power plants, maybe the market will prevent that they will be built, which would be quite important for the climate and for the emissions of India. And experts demand from India to follow China and South Africa to also announce long-term mitigation strategy And this strategy then should include a post-COVID-19 green recovery plan. It should reduce fossil fuel subsidies and, last but not least, to a certain extent, then phasing out coal power. When it comes to my home country, Germany, slightly improved in the ranking from 23 to 19, still not a climate champion. In the upper middle, the greenhouse gases and the energy use per capita is comparatively high in Germany. Still, we are still a coal country, but we see emissions in the last 2 years start to decrease, especially due to the shutdown of several coal power plants in Germany. But we have a lot of problems, especially in the transport sector, but also in the building sector, where we nearly don't have any functioning policies in the transport sector regarding emission reduction, and also the renovation rate of our old buildings needs to increase a lot. Last but not least, I would like to say a few words on China. China slipped again into the group of the low-performing countries. We see a mixed picture in China this year. On the positive side, we see the already mentioned announcement by the government to peak emission before 2030 and reach net zero emissions before 2060. But we have to wait actually for details and the implementation of these targets to really say whether they go then in the right direction or not. What is China already doing? It's rapidly deploying non-hydro renewable energy sources and is in the process of developing a national emission trading scheme, which then will hopefully limit the emissions from the power sector, which have a major part in China. So we see then on the negative side, especially there, the low rating for the greenhouse gas emission category. But if this long delayed cap and trade program will be launched next year and the government publishes more information regarding how it will reach net zero emissions, China could rise again in the next year's climate change performance index. Saying that, I would like to give the word to Stefan, who would say a bit more about the laggards in the index. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, Jan. Stefan Singer from Climate Action Network International. We are representing about 1,500 CSOs, NGOs worldwide to work on climate. So we are very happy to have been worked on the CCPI for a couple of years, this Climate Change Performance Index, and I will focus for Ken on two issues. One, addressing the laggards, as we see those, and then looking in the future of the coming year in 2021, what we want to see as Ken, because there's a strong urgency on climate. On the laggards, if you just look at the deep red on the right side, you see at the bottom United States, Saudi Arabia, and then you see also the Russian Federation on 52, and then the fourth one is Australia on 54. So we leave the others out for a couple of reasons, because these countries are deeply entrenched in fossil fuels. And they are representing less than 1/10 of the global populations, but are powerful countries among the rich nations in the G20 and in the OECD. These countries, all of them, have no proper federal climate or clean energy policy. They have no proper or adequate NDC, climate targets for 2030, to address the climate challenge for 1.5 or even 2 degrees. They have no proper planning for doing so in the next years, unfortunately. The US, even at the bottom of the league table, the US has even left the Paris Agreement. Well, we hope with the new government, they will return to it pretty soon, but this is not good enough. We need more from the US, but we can talk about that separately. These countries are rich. If you see at the top, on the left side, the GDP per capita in so-called power purchase parities in dollars shows you that compared to the world average, all those 4 countries, Russia, US, Australia, and Saudi Arabia, are comparably rich, about 3 to 4 times than the world average, which includes those countries. They wouldn't be included, the world average would be lower. So they have the potentials and the opportunities to significantly support developing countries, which is very important for us, SCAN, support developing countries, mitigation, adaptation to a large extent. Then the slide below, if you look into their footprint on the planet, you see that these 4 countries, Russia, US, Saudi, and Australia, have again 3 to 4 times higher CO2 per capita emissions of CO2 and the similar amount of energy consumptions per capita in terms of oil equivalents, tons OE per capita per year. The numbers are from 2018 and coming, by the way, from the IEA. On the right side, you see these countries are also deeply entrenched in firing the world with their dirty exports on fossil fuels. If you just look into the global share of gas exports in 2019, then you see that 3 countries, Russia, US, and Australia, are responsible for about 50% of all gas exports worldwide. Similar with oil, it's Saudi, US, and Russia who are responsible for close to 40% of all oil exports worldwide. So they make lots of a fortune of their dirty exports. And Australia, on top of that one, is one of the largest coal exporters and building currently the large Adani mine in Australia, which, if all the coal is in there, is emitted, is burned and the CO2 emitted, this will account for about roughly 3 times the annual present CO2 emissions of the entire European Union. This Adani mine is the biggest coal mine probably ever built and ever opened. In case it's being opened, our colleagues fight against that one. Second point is, what do we want in the next year? We have an urgency. We have the highest ever CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. We have 2019, 2020 was a little bit of an exemption. 2019, the highest CO2 emissions worldwide. We need all countries to take early actions now, not long-term global net zero commitments to 2050 are nice, but they don't help us now to achieve the targets to stay on a trajectory for meeting and committing to the 1.5C survival target, which has been decided by the UNFCCC to be part of the Paris Agreement, and the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has worked on that one. That means all the NDCs of the rich countries, climate pledges for 2030, need to be appropriately renewed, adapted, and improved to have early actions on renewables, on energy efficiency, on combating desertification, on combating deforestation, on all the gases we need to reduce significantly to be in line with 1.5C. And this shall all lead to a reduction of 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to give us a chance to stay in line with the 1.5C trajectory, which is a survival target for many developing countries. But we need also significant support for financing, for mitigation and adaptation for developing countries, which is fundamentally lacking by most rich nations. I would say for all rich nations. That would be my last points on this issue. And with this issue, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Hadja Kamlici from Morocco, who will do a deep dive on that particular country. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you so much, Stefan. Well, Morocco ranks 7th this year, thanks to the strong renewable energy targets. Also, Morocco's decades on renewables has achieved 99% electricity access for all citizens. The NDCs are in line with at least 2 degrees trajectory, with overall still developing and poor country, with the GDP per capita slightly above the $3 in 2019, for comparison with Switzerland that has more than 25-fold higher per capita GDP. Morocco's per capita annual electricity use is only 12%. It's around 750 kilowatt hours compared to the EU average. And per capita fossil gas use is about 300 meters, which represents only 3% of that of Europe in per capita terms. Morocco's CO2 emissions per capita are well below the 2 tons, roughly 1/5 of Germany. So, well, Morocco's energy potential in renewable energies is now remarkably more competitive. It virtually represents production capacity equivalent to the gas and oil of Nigeria or Venezuela. The exploitation of these deposits would greatly reduce the energy dependence, improve the purchasing power of citizens, the competitiveness of industries and public accounts, but also that will consolidate the country's international positioning. Morocco also has commendable commitment to the Paris Agreement, and its engagement in climate alliances gives it a positive role as a leader with regard to energy and sustainability on the African continent. That allows Morocco to showcase how energy access for all might be implemented cost effectively, affordable, and reliable. The country receives a high rating for its international climate policy. However, Morocco has to stop the development of more coal, as unfortunately is planned and ongoing. The exciting role for Morocco is to play a strong role in the region with a just transition to renewables and energy efficiency, and also maximize decentralized electricity production at the levels of households, industries, municipalities, farms, and cooperatives. So that was the overview of Morocco. Thank you so much. I give the floor to Audrey to follow on. Thank you.
Many thanks, all four of you for these first presentations and insights. We will now stop the recording of the presentation and come to our Q&A session. Please do understand that journalists have a priority for the Q&A session for all the colleagues present today. And please, again, do use the Zoom function Q&A and not the chat, or raise your hand, decline your identity, and eventually address also which panelist shall answer your question. I have already one hand raised, Lidija Gomez. Lidija Gomez, your mic is on.
But you have to unmute yourself.
Lidija Gomez? No, no ongoing. Okay, I don't see any question yet under the question and answer tool. Maybe I just throw the first one, if you allow me then. General questions specific about Sweden. What is Sweden doing better compared to other countries? Jan.
Well, yeah, Sweden, as I said before, is doing in the moment a lot on the international part. It's a leading country regarding better EU targets, and it is reducing its emissions more than other European countries. It has a lot to do with a high CO2 price, with a good policy framework, and the new government is committed here. But but of course, even Sweden is not doing perfect. As I said before, we have a relatively dirty car fleet in Sweden, and a high energy use per capita, which has to be reduced.
Thank you. We have a first question on the Q&A tool. Bert Pedersen, I hope I didn't cut your name, from the Danish daily Kristelig Dagblad, asking, the net zero targets depend on carbon storage. What are your recommendations on this?
Maybe Niklas.
If I may, Audrey, or
please.
others. Yes, thank you. No, that's a very good question. So many countries have said that they want to go to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the middle of the century. And it's very important that the rules, that the countries are very clear how to get there. And this is not just a bookkeeping trick, but real reductions. And one thing is, the real important thing is we need to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions to zero by 2050 globally. That means if individual countries want to get there, they cannot lean on purchasing credits from others or large shares of negative emissions or carbon dioxide removals. So it's very important that countries set net zero targets and specify that a large share of these reductions, or almost 100%, are done through reducing their own emissions and not relying on offsets from other countries or carbon dioxide removals. Removals may be necessary in the second half of the century. That's something we need to think about as well. But I think it should not dilute the net zero target. So that's an important element here.
Can I add on that one, Audrey?
Yeah, Stefan, please.
From a CAN view, I think in addition to what Niklas said, we are strongly in favor of CAN International to promote restoration of degraded ecosystems, protection of forests which are threatened, which would contribute to natural carbon storage and would not mean the kind of artificial geological carbon storage which comes by, let's say, bioenergy carbon capture and storage or air storage. That would be part of the natural restoration of the planet and support and protection of ecosystems, and would add a lot to the emissions reductions, which are the priority, as Niklas has said. I think we need to say that one because we need to have not only the reductions of emissions reductions, we need also to save biodiversity with sound climate policies to a large extent, which would not include offsets and trading. I want to be very clear, Canada has a position on that one, but it is a kind of measure in its own right. It needs funding, it needs support, it needs policies, and that will have many multiple benefits. And I think countries have not grasped it yet, unfortunately, but we need to work on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much. We have a question from Esther Miro, who would like the panel to comment on the bad results of Spain and how comes its situation is so different from the Portuguese one, so a derby questions, being such similar countries in so many ways, according to Esther. Maybe for Jan? Your mic is on.
Sorry. Thank you for that question. First of all, to the very specific questions on Spanish and Portuguese policy, I would like then also to ask the expert that we have asked for, because I have to admit I'm not an expert for all the 58 climate policies that we address here. That's why we are asking our colleagues from CAN. But if I check briefly the scores for Spain, then we of course see one major problem. Spain was, if you remember, in the early 2000 years until 28, 29, a world champion in building renewables. And now they've held back, if you check the renewable development, to rank 58. So they have nearly no renewables more here, and so this would be a major problem, and this differs especially to Portugal, where the extension of renewable is better and higher. Spain has higher emissions than Portugal, and also the greenhouse gas emissions trend is also the greenhouse gas emissions are increasing. So here we find major differences. If you want to find the experts who agreed to be mentioned, then you please go to our website ccpi.org, and they find a scorecard for every country, where we also display the names of possible interview partners for you.
Thank you, Jan. Maybe you can post the link into the chat. We have a similar question regarding other specific country I have a questions from Kyodo News, from Tetsushi Ida from Japan, who would like you to comment also the performance of Japan, like the coal addiction of Japan, and who would welcome your recommendation for Japan, and also the questions from Tagesanzeiger Zürich about Switzerland. So it's everyone would like to know what is about the national the national circumstances.
Maybe Stefan, you would like to say something about Japan. I know you have some ideas about that, or Niklas also. Maybe Niklas start and then Stefan, because Niklas, you start with the target.
Maybe I do that indeed. It's good to hear these questions, because this is what this climate change performance index is about, and it's unique. It has these 57 countries. So great that you asked for details on them, because you rarely find them for some of these countries. So that's very good. In Japan, I think there's some movement happening. I think that China was going for a net zero by 2060, shook up also Japan a little bit. And just after that, the Japanese government approved and announced a net zero target by 2050. That's long term, but that is not at all yet consistent with the short-term plan. So Japan is now thinking about updating its target for the short term, which is really important, in particular because there's still the question of going into coal, going into nuclear, or going into renewables. That is currently being discussed, and I think that's the most important decision that still needs to be made. Japan is still on rank 45, so relatively low. Moved up a little bit because of the long-term targets, but it all depends now on what the new energy plans are for the short term. Over to you, Stefan.
Well, you said it almost all. I mean, I would like to add to the to Japan that the new prime minister seems to be much more active and much more aware on the climate change and clean energy issues. I think there's movement in Japan as well. To basically stop the huge funding by the export credit agencies of Japan for coal in other countries in the region, in Asia in particular. I think that would be very, very useful, because export credit agencies have no moral role to support dirty technologies in times of climate change. They should support renewables, clean technologies, energy efficiency, but not coal. And Japan so far was one of the largest, besides Korea, one of the largest, or basically the largest creditor of export credit agencies for helping Japanese technology to promote coal technologies abroad. So that needs to stop. If that is stopped, I'm sure Japan will improve considerably. If Japan has good NDCs and good targets, as the new prime minister has said they will work on that one, and I hope in a participatory and inclusive approach with NGOs, then Japan will move further up. We're looking for that one because we believe that Japan has that potential to do so as a very talented, technology-oriented nation.
Thank you, Stefan. Any comments also on Switzerland, maybe?
Not me. My wife is Swiss, but that's it.
If you want, Jan, I can say 2 words. Or
maybe you start and I add.
Okay. Yeah, I think Switzerland is an interesting case because Switzerland has an ambitious short-term target, but wants to achieve it with cooperation with other countries. And that in general is a very good thing, that countries need to help each other. But it does not take attention away from reducing emissions at home. And again, if we want to keep climate at safe levels, we need to halve global emissions in the next 10 years. Yeah, cutting emissions in half in the next 10 years. That means countries like Switzerland or all developed countries actually would have to do that at home, and then help other countries that can't do this to also go on that trajectory. So saying that one goes to minus 50% and or has a certain target, and not all of these reductions are really done at home, one has to be very careful. It's good that Switzerland wants to support other countries. That is, I think, a good model, but it should not take attention away from reducing emissions at home. Jan?
Merci beaucoup, Niklas. Thank you very much. We still have a few moments and minutes for questions. And here's a question from Urmi Goswami from the Economic Times. Could you please elaborate on the results of the 3 developing countries, Morocco, Chile, India. What is driving the performance in particular for what is driving the performance for India?
Maybe I start here, and you help me then, especially also Hajar with Morocco. Well, what all three countries have in common is relatively low emissions, and that's important. One of the most important things if you want to protect the climate. They have, but they also have high trends on new renewables, which then might be helping not to go the dirty way that European countries or the US has done by developing itself. So and all of them have relatively strong targets. So they have ambitious targets, still not high emissions, and good on renewables. What I want to sum it up. But of course, all of these countries have their own issues and problems. Maybe Hajar or the others can add on that.
Yes, I can comment on Morocco. As you say, there is a good balance between the mitigation, the development of renewable energies, and it scores highly within the energy use per capita. Because Moroccan energy use per capita is very, very low comparing to other developing and developed countries. Which gives it a very good positioning. Adding to it the long-term strategy on climate action. The policy is well developed and have strong targets as 52% on renewables targets for 2015 and 42% to 2013. So that gives it a strong rate. Adding to that, the 12 involvement within the international policy agenda of UNFCCC worldwide. So that makes it a good balance for developing countries to take leadership in climate action. I think same for Chile. Because it has a good balance also. It has this positive balance regarding climate mitigation action, which is reflected in the facts of the current indicators for GHG emissions, renewable energy, and energy use that receives a high rating. I think those are the most important ingredients for these developing countries that are rating quite high.
Many thanks.
Can I add on that one? Is it still time? Just shortly.
Please, Stefan.
I do not know whether it went in the rating in particular, but I think it might have done. Chile. One point on Chile is one of the countries, one of the developing countries. Well, by the way, it's soon an OECD country. We shouldn't hide that one. But Chile is one of the countries that has in the global south that had committed to phase out coal as much as possible prior to 2030. That's, I think, something which India could look at. I know the discussion in India a little bit. India is being rated high because it has very ambitious renewable targets, 450 gigawatt by 2030. India has achieved, I think, compared to other countries with energy poverty, significantly breakthroughs in providing energy, electricity, in particular for poor households which had no electricity or poor electricity. I think there have been a couple of significant improvements in the last years. India also has achieved significant improvements in energy efficiency in industry. So which is for developing countries, which is a booming industry, not something which is a given, for instance. And of course, they're low energy consumer per capita, comparably low per capita CO2 emitter, still a poor country. So India is very well placed where it is. I think India could do better in the future if it would be strongly questioning its still, I think, counterproductive coal-dependent parts I think India could do better on that one, and then they would be really on the top of the league as a developing country, and that would be great. The coal is spoiling, basically, the good rating already. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you. Last round for question is open. I have one myself, I must say. What about this unexpected pandemic guest we had this year? What about COVID-19? Why did you not include 2020 data in this? And what would be the impact of COVID-19 for the table?
Well, maybe we start here, and maybe Niklas, you add up. Thank you for that question. Well, in general, what we see here is kind of an unbiased picture because of COVID-19. We have very different CO2 reduction because of COVID-19. In general, we see around about -7% of the global emissions just because of COVID-19, because of the global economic decrease of the GDP. That's, by the way, exactly the number we would need for every year to go for 1.5 degrees, and we would desperately need to do that without such a pandemic. What we see is that what is possible and what we can do to combat a crisis. And now, as Niklas said in the beginning, it's really decisive whether we take the billions to recover the economy and combat the climate crisis in the same time, which is possible. And some countries which our question has shown are doing already. So this is kind of a hope that we will have reached the global peak of emissions in 2019, but there's a long way to go. And why we did not exclude 2020 data is just because from the comparability point of view, there's no good data there. Even for all the nearly 60 countries, we even just have preliminary data for 2019, which is tough to compare. So therefore, we have to check whether we get better data next year. For this year, it was just not possible to integrate them.
Niklas or Stefan, do you want to add something? Niklas?
Yeah, thanks. Indeed. So as Jan said, it's difficult to integrate that into the index yet, but what we have is the special survey on green recovery measures. And if you look at the brochure, then you find the details. And there we see that quite a lot of countries indeed take the measures that are good for recovery and for the climate. For example, over 70% of the countries have fiscal incentives in place for zero-emission vehicles. They're new because of recovery. They support the uptake of efficient technologies in industries or buildings, that's 60%. Or you have, even you have a few countries which use this moment for a fiscal reform away from fossil fuel subsidies. Currently, fossil fuels are very cheap, and you can use that moment to change your fiscal scheme for fossil fuels to get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. And that gets you more revenues in the government budget. So there's many good ways how to do that. And the more governments know about these good ways, the more they can think about and putting them in. So have a look at the brochure for more details. Thank
you.
Can I add one point, Audrey?
Yeah, Stefan, please.
I don't want to spoil the wine, Niklas, with water. But I think we need to be honest to ourselves and also see that a couple of organizations and institutes have analyzed that the post-COVID economic recovery plans foresee an additional funding to fossil fuels of $240 billion roughly globally, which is huge. And again, the largest provider of those fossil fuels presents and gifts is the US. The Trump government has committed to about $85 billion basically to oil and gas and coal. Again, that goes back to the laggard, to the top laggard at the bottom of the league. And I think we're all happy, as Ken, I can say, that we see hopefully regime change in the US strongly. It's not just the White House, huh? But that's what we hope. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to get where we want, even if the post-COVID economic recovery messages have a couple of good points in there. I agree on that one. But still, we see in some of those economic plants. China, by the way, too, as well on coal. Not so good measures, and that might bring us back on something which we do not want. A revival of fossil fuel support, which we do not want. So I stop here.
Thank you, many thanks. Yeah, hopefully not only a change of the narrative, but a deep change. And thank you also for highlighting that it is quite crucial how the recovery money is going to be spent. I see no other questions today for our new CCPI. May I remain ccpi.org or #CCPI. Many, many thanks today. Many thanks to all of you. Many thanks to Jan, Niklas, Stefan, Hajar. We will leave it there. Read it. It's long, but it's very good insight into how the countries fight or not against climate change. Many thanks for following this press conference, and come at us if you have any further questions on later on. Many thanks. Goodbye.